Zero fee routing. Welcome back to the show.
Nice being here again.
So we're here to do a little bit of a post-mortem on the zero fee routing project, and who knows, maybe someday you'll restart this back up. But I thought this would be an interesting show for listeners who wanted some insight into what it was like for you running the zero fee routing node. So, do you want to just start off with why you've made this decision to close down?
Yeah, for me, it was always a factor of how much time I have to spend towards the node. I was planning to move the node over to a more professional setting, but those plans didn't pan out in time. And since I'm expecting my second child pretty soonish, and I don't have enough time to basically harden the node appropriately, I decided to just shut it down for the time being, see if I can start it back up at a later time when I have enough mental and actual time capacity to do it correctly,
Yeah.
to do it right.
And of course, congrats on the second child coming soon. So,
Thank you.
family is very important. So, I don't think anyone's really faulting you there. I think what might be interesting for listeners and just people who are maybe interested observers of Bitcoin and the Lightning Network, there might be some people who say, "Oh, look, this guy was running one of the big routing nodes, and even he couldn't do it." So, I'm your thought on that idea. Like, do you think there's some kind of infeasibility to do this, or do you believe that that the bar will rise and it will be only, let's call it semi-professional or professional people who can do this kind of business in the future?
Yeah, that totally depends on how things will develop right now. For me, it was never a charity, although I've been perceived that way. So for me, it was always I was looking to make a return. I just tried a different approach. Instead of charging for routing, I charged for opening channels to others. That was actually fairly profitable. I made about 2-ish% APY, so like a 2% return on my invested capital, which is okay, I guess. There's no market for lending out Bitcoin, so there's no market price for that. So I don't know if it's a good percentage or bad, but yeah, that's where I was. I think this percentage is going to rise a little bit with time as the market matures. Right now, there's tons and tons of liquidity basically given away for free by hobbyists, which is a great thing at this point in time. But I think this is going to uh, that hobbyist movement is going to professionalize quite a bit.
I see. And just to, again, contextualize this for listeners, what size of node were you running? How many Bitcoins were in that node in terms of
Yeah,
capacity? Roughly how many channels were you running at that point?
yeah, yeah. When I closed down last week, the node was at, I think, right about 100 Bitcoin public capacity. Little less than half was my liquidity, so it was fairly balanced for a node that size. It had 1,600 channels roundabout, and it was one of the largest nodes in the network. I'd say one of the busiest. I think it's this. Yeah, well, I don't know because those numbers are not public. So I guess I was like one of the top five in size and routing volume at that point in time.
Yeah, sure. And so I know you're also commenting on what is the fair way to unwind this thing, right? Because people
Yeah,
had paid up an upfront fee for a certain amount of time. And so how do you then unwind it, and what decision did you make in the end?
yeah, I've pondered about this quite a bit because I wanted to do it in the most fair and correct way possible. Because as soon as you announce something like, okay, I'm going to shut down, the no new channels would be opened, all the channels would probably get closed, and so if somebody paid me for my liquidity and I changed my nature by saying, okay, I'm gonna close all channels except those that were paid for, then they would have bought something very different than they were getting. So for me, it was clear I can't do that without upsetting my customers and without being not a fair partner. And this is why I decided to basically, and I'm still working on that, to basically refund all the channels that were opened for payment in the last 90 days before me closing down. So I'm working on a way where people just basically authorize the refund to wherever, and then they get an LN or a withdrawal link that they can then use with whatever wallet they have to get their sats back, basically.
Yeah, and I presume that must be a lot of manual work for yourself also in terms of doing all the refunds for people.
Yeah, yeah. I was gonna automate that basically 100%. So I'm gonna create withdrawal links for all the channels that I opened, and then provide a way on my website where the customers can enter their data and then just get the refund.
Yeah,
Because otherwise, it's about I think 500 to 600 refunds that I would have to process. This is not feasible to do that manually.
I see. And you, over the course of time, there were a lot of people who just opened a channel to you off their
Yeah.
own bat, that they just wanted to
Yes.
be connected with you because you're a well-connected node. So I'm curious as well. You mentioned to some extent this idea being a victim of your own success. Would it have
Yeah.
been easier if your node, paradoxically, would it have been easier for you if your node was actually a bit smaller?
Yeah, that totally depends on what the goal is. A smaller node has less funds at risk, so of course it would be easier regarding how much you would have to do to secure it, because yeah, it's just it becomes a very attractive target if it's such a huge node. If it's one of the top 5 nodes, it's going to be one of the top 5 targets basically for any kind of attack. And I knew I was not going to have the time to properly monitor that, and that's why I just decided to not half as it basically, just to
Yeah,
shut it down. And yes,
yeah.
it would have been easier if it was just like a smaller Raspberry Blitz node with a couple hundred, maybe 200-300 channels. Yeah.
Yeah, totally fair. And so, high level, what were some of the lessons you learned on this journey of doing the zero fee routing project?
The lessons, yeah. It is an incredibly fast growing space. The topology of the networks changes basically daily. Everybody has new ideas, tries out something. I really loved running the node. I'm really gonna miss it. And it's, yeah, well, it's still a very new technology. There's stuff breaking at times. Just yesterday, we had that LND bug again where Burak broke LND the second time in I think in like 2 weeks or something like that. So yeah, it's yeah. Plus, I think a couple days ago, LND had a bug where funds where a change was sent to an address that the node actually did not control, so the funds were basically lost. And this is stuff that usually doesn't happen, but it still can. And so it's not riskless to run a routing node. And the larger the node is, the more risk it's at, because you run into issues that else runs into, because you're just so big. This is what I had with CLN. I think like 2 or 3 times where I just ran into such a fringe situation that nobody accounted for, that my node basically broke, which was great for the developers because they they could fix it. But for me, it's like when my node goes down, I have no idea what to do. Uh, and this, although the support from the Core Lightning community was beyond excellent, it was like my node went down, and half an hour later, I had Rusty checking back on me, asking me if I could do X, Y, or Z to check if that fixes the issue. So that was excellent.
Yeah, and I think in some ways it's some people were willing to, like yourself, who were willing to really put yourself out there and just give this a try. And I think maybe that's why Rusty and the Core Lightning team obviously are excited to see that. I can imagine,
Yeah, yeah,
because they're seeing somebody put their code to test in production out there in the wild. And so I think that's pretty interesting. I think the point you make about it not being riskless is an interesting one, because I think a lot of people focus on custodial risk, and that's right. Custodial risk is a big risk, um, but I think maybe the point and the experiment that you were running and the project that you were running has shown it's not just about the custodial risk. It's also, even in a non-custodial case, right? You're running your own Lightning node,
yeah,
you hold the keys. It's not custodial, but there are still all of these security risks. And so perhaps that's the question for people in their mind as well. Like if they're saying, okay, 2% is the return I'm getting for that risk, is that a fair return? I mean, how much would it cost to secure,
yeah,
in this case, I mean, 100 BTC, what's that? I mean, off the top of my head, what's that, like 2 million in fiat terms?
yeah, yeah,
How much does it cost to secure that? So I think that those are some of the questions, and of course, maybe that will come up over time, and maybe if the transaction volume increases on the Lightning Network, then maybe you would get a lot more. There'd be a lot more people who want to buy channels from you.
yeah, yeah. For me, it's like if you one of the reasons that made me kind of reconsider the amount of risk I was taking on is like if you have like a 2% yield, that means if you get hacked in average at every 50 years, that would mean you break even, and that's 50 years running a node without losing it is not. I wouldn't bet that much money on a 50-year time frame that going well. So if you run a node and it breaks down, or it has a catastrophic loss or whatever, and you lose your funds, and it's like, yeah, well, that's bound to happen at some point for somebody. And yeah, you probably be better to not run one huge node, but do it like Ellen Big does it. He runs like I think 30 to 40 nodes. So if you have one breakdown or one get hacked, you have a loss, but you don't lose all
The whole
your all the capital at once.
I see. But I think there was maybe an iconic aspect to, there's this one big node, and maybe there's
Yes.
a benefit to that. But I think to your point, and maybe to Steelman, what you're saying, it's like maybe the benefit does not outweigh that level of risk of putting all your
Yeah.
like all the coins into one big Lightning node. So perhaps that's a lesson learned, is to have maybe a network like LN Big
Yeah.
style.
Yeah. Yeah. And it is definitely easier to manage multiple nodes with little funds, but it was a great marketing aspect of it being such a huge centralizing force in the network. Basically, everybody that knew about my node wanted to have a channel with it just because it made payments so cheap and easy.
I see. And so, in some sense, maybe right now it's still hobbyist days, and they are effectively subsidizing because they're taking a risk, right? Because they want to be the
Yeah,
pioneers. They're out there trying to take that risk, and there are people who are effectively underpricing the liquidity that they place into their Lightning nodes, or in other cases, maybe they just have a Lightning node more because they want to be able to do personal payments, right? I think I'm probably more
yeah,
in that category. I'm not trying to be a routing person. I just have it just to be able to make and take
yeah.
payments. I'm not trying to be a routing guy per se. But I'm curious your thought there. Do you believe the hobbyists are undervaluing their liquidity?
Hobbyists are always undervaluating whatever they put into their hobby. So they undervaluate their time, they undervaluate the funds. Yes, that's the definition of being a hobbyist, basically. So yes, yeah, they are, which is not a bad thing. It's just as the network matures, I think this is gonna probably change a bit.
Yeah, of course, because I think ultimately people will have alternative uses for their capital. Now, of course, or they may decide that the return is not worth the risk in terms of hot
Exactly.
wallet risk and so on. That they may decide, look, I'm better off keeping my stuff in a multi-sig, secured, and therefore less risk of losing my, stuff in some kind of hack or a bug or something that
Yeah.
happens. So in terms of the key difficulties that you faced along the journey, if you had to pick some of the high risks, what were some of those big risks?
Oh, those were basically all hypothetical. So you have to make sure that the software that the node is running on is up to date. So there's no security leaks. You have to try to have as little software as possible running on the machine. I did encrypt the whole drive that the node was running on. I encrypted that. I ran it from a data center, so it was a remote machine, and you have to account for rogue employees trying to break into the machine, getting the funds out. So there's tons and tons of attack vectors that you have, especially if you're not self-hosting at home, which for such a huge node you basically can do. So those were the issues I had at one time. When I ran it from home, I had hardware issues. My disk broke down, and I almost lost access to that. That was kind of touch and go there for a bit, and yeah, that was like months back though. So yeah.
So, out of curiosity, then, for the listeners running who want to run stuff at home, what are the main hurdles there? Like, is it that you need this really beefy box to run it from home? Is it that your internet connection needs to be really, really strong? Or is it actually maybe a physical security risk that you don't want to, let's say, you're worried about doxing your home address? And obviously, if the machine is hot and there's a lot of coins on there, is it that risk?
Yeah, well, if you're just running a personal node, which I really encourage everybody to do to their personal Lightning payments non-custodially, um, there's very little that you need to think about, because if you put uh, I don't know, like a couple $100 worth of Bitcoin on it to pay via Lightning, that's all easy, good to go. You can use a Raspberry Blitz for that or something like that. If you want to run a larger routing node, like tens to hundreds of Bitcoins in capacity, um, things get very, very different, because you have to account for the public capacity is known, and your IP address is known if you're not using it, if you're not a Tor only node. And with the IP address comes the location. If you run it from home, your home location, at least for your internet service provider, will be known, and then things get risky, especially if you try to not uh, dox your stack, basically.
Yeah, I see. And so, what about in terms of running the hardware required to run a larger node? What kind of
Yeah.
hardware requirements did you face there?
Not really. Hardware requirements, at least with Core Lightning, was not an issue at all. I could have done. I had a much beefier machine than I needed. I could have done it with like 16 gigs of RAM, uh, about 100, 200 gigs of disk space, uh, besides the
The
blockchain
blockchain,
storage
obviously,
for
yeah.
Bitcoin D. But that's, and that was one of the largest nodes in the network. So you can do it with fairly weak machine, actually, or old machine, basically.
Right, that makes it interesting then, because yeah, there's a possibility there for other people who want to do this. I think maybe if then is it fair to understand, or at least as I read you, then you're saying the biggest security risk was really more just like the hot wallet risk. That was really the biggest risk.
Yes, yes. The hot wallet risk, the factor that your funds are always on the move. You have channels open to you. They close. Those funds that you get from the closing go to a wallet. This, that, and the other, and you constantly have your funds moving. and hot funds are always at risk. There's tons and tons of stuff that can go wrong with hot funds. Um, Even despite getting them stolen, you might lose access to your disk for whatever reason. There's stuff that can go wrong.
Yeah. And were you paranoid or concerned about any of those other attacks that would periodically get disclosed on some of these academic papers? So, for example, there was flood and loot, or there were some of these other ideas around channel jamming. Were you concerned about any of those with your big zero fee routing node?
Moderately concerned. It's not like I went out of my way to harden against those kinds of attacks. Which probably, if you the larger you get, the more you have to pay attention to these kind of attacks, because you're probably one of the targets that doesn't happen to you if you run like a very very small lightning routing node or a medium sized routing node. So yeah, it is an issue. But I didn't lose any sleep over it.
I see. Yeah. And so I know there were obviously in that time that you were running the node, you had your own journey, as we spoke about on the earlier show. You started with LND, then you switched to Core Lightning. Did any of the vulnerabilities shake your faith in the Lightning Network? Like, so for example, this recent one where Barack basically uh, caused some difficulties for the LND node runners out there and the Lightning Labs team. Did any of that shake your confidence in the Lightning Network going forward?
No, not at all. It's just for my risk appetite plus my time. It's just not right now. I do plan on coming back eventually if there's still demand for what I did, which I think right now there is, but probably in a more professional setting.
I see. Yeah. And so, in terms of the time commitment, can you elaborate a bit there? Like, how much time did it really take to go and do all these things around maintenance, securing your node, and all of those aspects?
It's fuzzy to describe because there's so much to it. It's like talking to others on Twitter, chatting on Telegram. Then there's the actual maintenance of the node itself. Then there's I had an API, I had a website. So there's tons of stuff. Then you read about channel jamming or that jam and loot attack that was published, I think, last week or something like that. And then you kind of have to dig a little bit deeper and see, is that an actual risk that I'm running right now, and how big is it? And this stuff takes time. So I couldn't tell you I spent like X amount of hours per day, because it's just like an hour here and half an hour there. Then you hear about hosted channels from Fiat Jeff and you get excited about that, lose a couple of hours there. So, yeah.
Yeah.
If you're really interested in it and try to get a feel of the whole field, it is pretty time consuming.
Yeah, and I think that's totally fair. It's early days still, and there's all these new things still being found. But yeah, I think fundamentally for the average person who just wants to, like, if they want to run a Lightning node, they could do it with a little bit of research and a bit of time and work. It's perhaps not as easy as just running a Bitcoin node, right? I think it's fair to say.
That's fair to say.
Yeah.
But if you don't plan on running a 100 Bitcoin capacity node with thousands of channels, it basically takes no time. So you just start it up, let it run, and be done. So the fact, the only thing that makes it time intensive is the whole business around of it.
Yeah. Yeah, so you had to run a website where people could buy channels from you,
Exactly.
and I presume you also had to spend at least some time doing customer support, customer service, or at least if
Yeah,
something went wrong,
exactly.
you had to get back to them and manage that part
Yeah.
of it.
Now,
So as a one man band or one man business, then you have to also think about the time cost and effort that you're putting into it
yeah.
for that 2% in this example. It's
Yes.
quite possible that in the future that would rise, that if you were to do this kind of thing, let's say there's a lot more people using the Lightning Network, maybe there's a lot more demand, maybe that goes up to 5% or 10%, and
Yeah.
potentially, let's say there's a Bitcoin bull cycle, and Bitcoin does a 10x or a 20x. Now at that point, now it starts to maybe be worth your while again, right?
Yeah, exactly. So it's basically a risk reward plus how you value your own time. So if I reflect back on it, it is, even I did it as a hobbyist project because time I invested in it. Um, Even if I don't account for my opportunity cost with the capital, it was not a nice hourly wage, basically.
Right. But that's like we said, that's as it is, today, in, let's call it,
Yeah,
over 2021 and 2022 when you ran this thing. Imagine in a few years' time, let's say there's been another cycle, Bitcoin is like 10x, and at that point, it might really be worth your while. So,
it
um,
it, it might.
yeah, but we don't know. Of
It
course, we don't
completely
know.
depends
Yeah.
on how the network itself develops and where we land basically regarding the interest that you can basically generate with running a node.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, and so I guess one other aspect, how much did the node require constant monitoring, right? It's like, as I understand, some people have a job where they're on call, right? So the idea is they're not having to do this thing right now, but they have to basically have the phone by their side and be ready for the call to say, hey, come in, we need you to fix this. Did it feel a
Yeah.
bit like that when you were running zero fee routing node?
Um, Very, very little because if the node goes down, I didn't have like a whole battery of stuff that informed me about that, but I usually got Telegram messages basically right away, anyways. So yeah, it's kind of like you're on call, but since everybody knew this is like a hobbyist project, nobody was mad at me if the node was down for like a couple hours or so, which happened, I think, just once. So yeah, but it's kind of like you have the maintenance, and if it goes down, you have to bring it back up because otherwise you might get your funds stolen by somebody publishing old channel states and whatever. And so it is you can't just go away for 2 weeks and not look at it.
Yeah. 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 Understood. And so going forward, in terms of making it more accessible or more secure for node runners in the future, are there any features that you would like to see come into the main Lightning node implementations, whether that's Core Lightning or LND or Rust Lightning or Eclair? Are there any particular features that you think need to be fixed up or implemented?
No, I think the feature set that is already there is pretty powerful and pretty good actually. There's been tons and tons of development for core Lightning with commando and runes, where you can basically give very, very, very precise access to just certain functions, and also those certain functions just with different certain values that you can basically tell. Here's a key that only can open channels with sizes from 1 million Satoshi to 5 million Satoshi, and the key can only do this, that it can do nothing else. So that's pretty darn good. And again, if you just run your own personal node for your personal stuff, it's basically absolutely a no-brainer to do. But as soon as you start getting big, and that's where I was, and I didn't intend to become number 5 with regards to amount of channels. It just happened, and you can't stop the growth. Basically, I couldn't stop the growth. I could. There was no way to discourage others opening channels to me, basically, despite charging fees or something.
But I'm curious then, actually, let's say you got to a point where, you were above a certain size. Is it possible that you could just restrict new channels unless they were a paying customer?
Yeah, of course. That would have been one option, to basically disallow incoming channels. that were basically unsolicited incoming channels. Yeah, that would have been one option. Stuff that I thought about when thinking about my options regarding the node and its future.
I see. Yeah, and so another angle that we can approach this from is this idea of the market for an LSP, Lightning Service Provider, because
Yes.
users in the Lightning Network, maybe if you're newer, you won't really understand this, and maybe you just use an app like, say, Breeze as an example, and Breeze in the background will connect, to LSPs. Or I know John Carvalho's new wallet, the BitKit
Yeah.
wallet, has this idea of Block Tank, which is the LSP in the background. So, in one sense, you are operating as sort of like an LSP.
Yeah.
So I'm curious your thoughts on where the whole LSP market goes. Like, will it be a merchant facing function, or will it be, let's say, some LSPs are serving the end customer, the end user, let's say just the average guy who wants to pay or receive?
I think it's going to be both. I think LSP is where it's at right now with Lightning. So this is where tons of innovation happens right now. Um, there is a bunch of LSPs popping up right now, and I think there will be LSPs that serve huge retailers or merchants, and there will be LSPs like Breeze is an LSP basically that serves the users of the Breeze wallet by opening channels on demand instantly for them. So I think that's it's going to be a huge market. Where it's going to end up, I have no idea. We just have to wait and see.
Right. Yeah. And I think you're right to point out that there are different elements and different components involved here. So, another example could even be some LSPs who act as a swap provider. So, for example, Bolt.exchange, they help people who are, say, swapping off and on chain. So, as an example, you can pay them on Lightning and then they can pay you out on chain. Or I think they can also
Yeah.
do vice versa as well. And I'm sure you understand this, Zero, but just for listeners. So, that's perhaps another angle that LSPs could go, where you have to sort of manage an on-chain and an off-chain balance. And so I'm curious, from your perspective, you didn't really have to deal with much of that, right? Because your service was just more like, I'm selling you a channel, you just pay me up front. So it's a very, I guess,
Yeah.
simple model in that way.
Yeah, exactly. For me, it was I did not swap or loop out actively to get new liquidity, but for me, it was basically like I got incoming channels from others. When they got closed, I received funds back on chain that I could then reuse to open channels to again. So for
I
me,
see.
the whole on chain off chain thing was basically channels being open to me and getting closed again. Uh, Organically. So I usually didn't force that, but for the management of on-chain versus off-chain funds is going to be a huge deal. So although off-chain funds have more utility because you can pay more easily with them, they come basically at a discount. So you have to pay if you want to have on-chain funds. Basically, this is the loop charges, I think, right about 1% or sorry, 0.1% to switch your off-chain funds to on-chain funds. Others like DZ do that with a, I think, fairly similar rate. And this is going to be hugely interesting thing regarding switching from off-chain to on-chain, and who's getting paid for what and what has more price. Right now, off-chain funds have a lower price than on-chain funds, basically. So you have to pay if you want to move your off-chain funds to on-chain.
I see. Yeah. So, in other words, if you have funds, quote unquote, in Lightning, i.e., your UTXO has been put into a Lightning channel, then
Yeah.
for you to get them back out off chain, you have to, sorry, back to an on chain balance, let's say, you have to pay right now.
Yes.
And I mean, generally speaking, you have to pay if you're swapping either way, but it's kind of, it depends what kind of service and how you're doing it. And I think it's also, there's just so many different variables all in the air at once, right? Because it matters how many people are using Lightning. It matters how many merchants are accepting Lightning. So, for
Yeah.
example, we saw this recent news: Pick and Pay is doing Lightning payments, and they're apparently like
Yes.
a big supermarket chain in South Africa with, I think they're starting with 39 stores, but they're going up to 500 stores
Yeah.
eventually. And so that's going to be cool to see. And if lots of people are paying with Lightning, especially non-custodially there, then maybe that's going to start driving a lot of fees, and then we'll start seeing this behavior. And then the other big factor, of course, the other big elephant in the room is the quote unquote fee market or the block space market, right? Because in recent times, 1 sat per byte would pretty much clear eventually.
Yeah.
What happens if we do get a sustained fee market or a block space market? Then maybe that makes the whole Lightning routing node operator or your business model even more feasible or more needed.
Yes, exactly. So right now with the extremely low on-chain fees, especially if you don't mind waiting overnight, you could basically always get 1 sat per vbyte transactions through. So you basically for like 10, 15 cent, you could get your transaction through. So for any payment larger than, I don't know, like a couple $100 on chain would be the cheaper way to do it, unless you needed instant confirmation.
Right.
What Lightning brings is instant transaction finality, which is great because that has not existed before Lightning. That neither in Bitcoin nor in the
In the fiat
traditional
world, yeah.
financial world. So this is crazy innovative. So yeah, but if you don't mind waiting, doing on chain is the option right now, as long as we have that low fee environment. If we pay $10 per transaction on chain, things change. But yeah, maybe we'll get there in the next couple of years. But right now, it doesn't look like it.
Right. I think it depends how many people are pulling out their coins out of the exchanges and operating in a
Yes.
non-custodial environment. Of course, we encourage this. I know that the reality today is that there are a lot of custodial users who are, let's say, just using, as an example, using Binance and just using Binance, and they think that's Bitcoin,
Yeah.
right? Because you know what I mean. These
Yeah.
aren't people who necessarily, they don't know who you are. They don't know who Jimmy Song or Jameson Lop or any of these
Yeah.
people. They just use some custodial exchange because that's, from their perspective, that's what they want, because they don't know any better, right? Or maybe they don't care, but about the kind of non-custodial ethos. Now, of course, we're trying to encourage that. We want more people to do that, but we also know that that will drive a lot of fee pressure as well. And, arguably that could be seen as a good thing in the long term. Or a necessary thing in the long term. Um,
Necessary at some point.
yeah. And so, yeah, I guess it's interesting to see where it goes. And then at that time, if, let's say, the fee market or block space market more precisely goes up, then you really do start to need these swap providers, whether they are on and off chain swap providers, because there might be people who want to operate more natively in a Lightning environment, in a Lightning context. But there may be times where they need to periodically, let's say, flush some of their Lightning balance out into an on-chain, potentially into an on-chain
Yeah.
hot wallet, or maybe even the multi-sig wallet, because that's going into your savings. So it's kind of interesting to see that dynamic play out.
Plus an increase in on-chain fees would also change the whole dynamic for the Lightning Network, the way it's run now. Because right now it's cheap to open channels and be wrong about them. So you open a channel to another node just on a whim, see if it routes anything, and if it doesn't, you just close it because, well, that's 30 cents down the drain, lesson learned. But if it costs like $20 to open and close a channel, you think twice before opening channels. And also for LSPs like I was, if you open channels and the amount of capital you invest is like 30 cents, and if things go really wrong, I had one channel force close that had 30 pending HDLCs, basically my maximum that I allowed. And they closed at an incredibly high fee environment because, I don't know, at the time those transactions happened, each of them was carrying like a 3,000 sat fee with it. So I had like 90,000 satoshis in fees for that forced close. So that became extremely expensive for me, and because I opened that channel for way less than the forced close basically cost me.
So that's an example where you had an unprofitable channel. Which is
Yes, exactly.
quite a
Even though
shame.
I sold it.
Yeah, that's really weird to think about. But I mean, yeah, totally, it makes sense, right? And so yeah, 90,000 satoshis gone, unfortunately, because of that HTLC aspect. So I'm curious then as well, like in terms of Lightning wallets and things like that at the consumer grade, like if people are just talking about the typical wallets that people will use, that we might tell people to use as a non-custodial first-time user. So people say, okay, go to Moon Wallet or Breeze or Phoenix as an example.
Yeah.
But in the case of say Moon Wallet, it's kind of like doing a lot of on-chain transactions because they use a lot of
Yes.
these swaps, and so in a high-fee environment, the Moon Wallet ends up costing that user a lot, because it's not
Yeah.
Lightning native per se. Whereas let's say Phoenix and Breeze, they are Lightning native, so they can sort of handle the Lightning aspect more easily of just staying in Lightning and not having to go on chain all the time. But perhaps the trade off then is you're paying for channels and liquidity as part of the cost. Whereas I guess Moon is kind of wearing some of that cost for the users, and that yeah, so that kind of maybe raises questions about the sustainability of that model. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. But especially with regards to Moon, I never fully understood how it worked. And also, they are not very transparent about how it works. I think it works non custodially. And the way I understood it works is they take on a bunch of risk. So
Yes.
the end user does not take on risk basically at all, but they take on a bunch of risk. So especially in a high fee environment, I think they would have quite the trouble being profitable with what they do. So and same for others like Breeze, but they and Phoenix, but they could simply just raise the fees for the channels that they open to you, so they could kind of mitigate for high fees on
Yeah,
chain.
I see. And as I understand, I believe Moon are looking to eventually go more Lightning native too, but they're just not at that level yet. Or there's some more engineering work before they can get to that. But it'll be interesting to see what happens with all of that. Also, splicing. I think that's an interesting idea as well. So splicing is this idea that we can resize our channels without closing them. How do you think splicing changes that dynamic around routing, or how would you foresee that changing routing?
I don't think it's gonna change too much. I think it saves like one transaction on chain, so it reduces the cost a little bit. But especially since now Core Lightning 2 supports multiple channels per peer for a while now, um, it is a nice to have. I don't think it's mission critical right now. Maybe I'm underestimating the upside of it, especially in
Yeah,
a high fee environment. It might be quite interesting. Yeah.
yeah. And then what about collaborative channel opens? I'm curious your thoughts on that and how that might influence the whole market for routing. Do you have any thoughts
Yeah.
on this idea?
Yeah. I think that is one of the huge upsides of Lightning, that you could in theory open collaboratively open a channel where it's balanced from the get go. Core Lightning supports this from Lisa Nygut Nifty Nice. Dual funded channels, liquidity ads. I still run crowdfunding for getting that implemented for LND as well, because I think it could be hugely beneficial to the whole network if everybody could open and advertise their own liquidity in the market. It would be very much a decentralizing force in the market if that gets more widely used. Um, I hope it's getting built. That's all I can say about that.
Yeah. Yeah, so there's some of these ideas that I have noticed coming out of the core Lightning camp. So things like liquidity ads, and
Yes.
the collaborative channel opens idea, and also even some of the Blockstream guys like Warren Togami talking about Peerswap. I think that's a really cool
Yes.
idea, and maybe that's early, but I'd love to see that. I'm curious if you have any thoughts on Peerswap. Actually, could you just give a high level what is Peerswap and any thoughts
Yeah.
on what that does?
Peerswap basically allows direct peers to move funds from off chain to on chain, and I think the other way around. So you basically could request a peer where the liquidity in the channel is all on your side. You could send funds off chain over to them non custodially. So you don't risk the funds, you don't have to trust them. You send funds over to them and they swap it out on chain with you, um, and you get the funds returned on chain. That the upside of that is you don't have to do channel rebalancing, and you can get the channel balanced or balanced more balanced just by directly swapping with your peer.
Yeah.
The reason why I did not run this is because I what I did is I basically sold my on-chain liquidity, and if I offer free, in a way, free peer swaps, I will basically give away for free what I was otherwise selling. That's why peer
That's a fair
swapping
point.
was not an option for me. Otherwise, I would have done it because
Right.
the concept is great.
Yeah. And so let's put it this way. On if you were running your personal Lightning node with Core Lightning, you would enable PeerSwap and you would use it. But if you're running it as a
Yes.
business, then maybe not, because that's what you're selling.
Yeah, it depends on the what kind of business you are. But if you're in the business of selling on-chain liquidity, you can't give it away for free because otherwise people will just not
uh,
pay you for what they can get for free. Yeah.
yeah, that's totally fair. But it does make a lot of interesting possibilities, even to potentially make Lightning more private, also, because in this way, people can start managing some of their liquidity without using a centralized provider of liquidity. That if they start doing peer swapping with their peers, then it might be a way for people to loop out, as an example, without going through some centralized entity or some known entity, it just through a peer, right?
Yeah. Plus, it's going to be a lot cheaper too, because for if you loop out or if you use DZ's swap service or something like that, you not only pay the service that is switching your funds from off chain to on chain, you also have to pay to get your funds to them. And especially with Loop, that's usually that alone is usually 0.1% of the amount you're looping out. So if you could just peer swap it, even if the peer took a fee for it, it could be interesting.
Yeah. So when it comes to Lightning Network, are there any other things that you're excited about? What are you most excited about coming in the Lightning Network?
I am actually really excited about hosted channels, even though they are custodial. The reason why I am is because they solve an issue that we have when onboarding new users. Um, Breeze solved this very, very elegantly and great, because they open a channel to you, a non-custodial channel to you on the fly when receiving a payment, and basically take a little bit off that payment to pay for the channel you're receiving. But the issue we have is if you have a new someone you want to onboard onto Lightning, you can't do that in a non-custodial fashion easily, because you would have to open the channel to them, then you would have to wait for X confirmations on chain, which usually is 3, takes about half an hour. And so if you're sitting at a table with somebody, getting them all excited about Lightning, and then you tell them, okay, I'm going to open the channel to you, let's wait for an hour so the channel is open, that kind of like takes away the thunder quite a bit. And with hosted channels, you could receive that payment instantly. Yes, it's not, it's custodially. So you basically don't have the funds, but you're owed the funds. But you could then use those funds to purchase a channel afterwards, like a non-custodial channel, and move the funds over there. So you could basically onboard users instantly and then tell them that those are not really your funds. You're just owed these funds by some other entity. Get a non-custodial channel at some point, but for the initial, I'm going to show you how it works. It's actually pretty good.
I see. And so I've heard people explain it almost like a virtual channel at the start, and then later, once you turn it into a real channel, then there's then it's non-custodial, right?
Exactly. It's basically it is a virtual channel. It's like the host that hosts your channel accepts the payment for you and sends the payment out for you. So you basically you need their collaboration. If they shut you down, you can prove cryptographically that they cheated you out of those funds. But other than that, you would have no. If it's an unknown entity, all you have is like that proof that they cheated you. Well, it's better than nothing. If because if Wallet of Satoshi for some reason decided to shut some wallets down, you would have no proof besides a screenshot. Um, with hosted channels, you can cryptographically prove that the node with pubkey X cheated you out of funds. So yeah, it's a little bit a
Yeah,
little
it's
bit
at least
better.
something. Yeah, a little bit.
It's at least
Yeah, okay.
something. It keeps the peer honest because
Yeah.
especially if it's for pocket change amounts of money, like below $100, and they run a huge service, like if Bitfinex decided to do that, for example,
Mm.
they basically are custodian anyways, so they could do hosted channels easily from a regulatory standpoint. They would have no interest in cheating people out of their money because that would just kill their reputation. Um, of course, if you have a unknown entity in the Lightning Network that offers hosted channels, you should very much think whether you want to have them owe you money if you don't even know who they are and where they are at.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so maybe it's a tool there to leverage if the entity or individual already has an existing reputation that they don't want to
Yes.
lose, and therefore
Yeah.
there's at least some level of reputational loss if they were to try to rug
Exactly.
everyone. Um,
I,
so
I
yeah,
consider doing that, but the regulatory situation is that you become a custodian, and being a custodian is generally not a good idea for a single person if other people owe you money. So I decided against it, although I really like the idea. And I have a node running with hosted channels for myself. So just personal use hosted channels.
yeah. That's interesting to see. One other idea I was curious to get your thoughts on is this whole hardware signer, right? So you might have heard, I'm sure you've
Oh,
seen this
yeah.
idea of validating Lightning signer or hardware
Yes.
signing. This idea that it's a piece of hardware that maybe has certain policy rules incorporated into it to give you something like more like let's call it a warm wallet instead of a hot wallet. What are your thoughts on
Yeah.
that? And would that be potentially useful for you the next time you start this
Yes.
zero fee routing up?
It is. It is. The validating Lightning Signer project is like the most interesting project right now in the space because it would allow to uh, define rules so that the Lightning Signer just signs certain types of transactions, like routing forwards, for example, or channel openings, and you could basically configure it to just do that and nothing else, and you could just leave it running, and basically your funds would not be not at risk is such absolute term, but they would be way less at risk if you run it with a validating Lightning Signer. You wouldn't. You could just run the Lightning Signer from your home or one secure location and have the node sit uh, somewhere else. So it's an extremely interesting project. I'm looking very much forward to it becoming reality, and with it, the green light wallet from Blockstream.
Yeah, and so that could become a useful tool or even an essential tool for anybody who's
Essential.
running a professional level Lightning routing node, right? So if you're running something with tens, hundreds of coins on there, then yeah, maybe it really starts to become very much worth your while to look into the whole validating Lightning Signer project.
Yeah.
I actually will be chatting with those guys, but when they're ready to go on the show. So that'll
Yeah.
be an interesting one. Yeah, so I guess, is there anything else in the Lightning Network that you're looking forward to, or how about just from a Bitcoin perspective? Is there anything that you're looking forward to, or anything on your mind from a Bitcoin perspective?
Oh, I'm just still generally excited about how the network, Bitcoin as well as Lightning, have developed in the last couple of years. I'm very, very bullish on the technology. I don't expect it to go away. I expect Lightning to become the de facto standard for Bitcoin transaction over time, because it's just so instant and generally great. There's tons and tons of improvement in the pipeline there. I can't wait to see it all. I will definitely still be in the space. I will monitor, especially for validating Lightning Sign, especially for that tool, um, and hopefully make a return sometime next year or in 2024, maybe. Let's see.
Fantastic. Well, yeah, listeners, make sure you check out Zero Fee Routing. You can find him on Twitter. I'll link everything in the show notes. And Zero, thanks for joining me again.
Thank you for having me.